If you're ready to go.
Ready? All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Leah LaRue, and I'm the Director of Neighborhood Planning Units for the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning. Very happy to be joined tonight by some of my favorite colleagues ever. I'll start with Sam, who is the NPU University Registrar and Program Coordinator Senior for Training and Education Initiatives. Samantha.
Evening, y'all.
And I just saw Ide Santana join as well. Ide is our program development manager. Ide.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome.
And I don't think, although I know Tony is still in the office, I don't think I saw him join, but we're still in the office. And one of our honorary team members, Nicole, is also with us. Very excited to have this, to present this Zoning Fundamentals 2 class. If you're here, you've already taken Zoning Fundamentals 1. So I'll actually breeze through this instead of actually doing the whole dog and pony show. Just make sure you keep your mic muted unless the instructor tells you otherwise. Please keep your camera on if you're taking this class for credit. If you have a question, I'll show you how to raise your hand in case you forgot since the last time. I would remind you to please make sure your questions are relevant to course content. But I will say that Director Holmes and Instructor Holmes often uses, or not often, but does use real life, real Atlanta based scenarios in this class. So this is a good class to bring those questions that are relevant perhaps to your area or other things that you've seen around the city. To raise your hand, you'll want to click the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. When you do that, a pop-up box will appear and it says raise hand. You'll click on that button that says raise hand, and that is how you raise your hand. If you haven't done it in a while, feel free to practice. Without further ado, there's nothing else to delay us from getting started in this class. I'll introduce to you, or reintroduce to you, because you've already taken Zoning Fundamentals 1. I'll reintroduce to you my colleague, the Director of the Office of Zoning and Development, Kieta Holmes.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to Zoning Fundamentals 2. I'm happy that you all decided to join us again in this class, and I hope that this will be informative for you and you will use it in your NPUs and in your real estate portfolios or whatever, however you use the information, it will be beneficial to you. I'll start with a couple of things. This is Fundamentals 2, and I get quite technical in this class. Please, if you want me to stop, if you want me to repeat something, or if you want me to expound on something, please make sure that you raise your hand and I will call on you. I will allow you in this class to ask questions about real life projects or real life scenarios. None of the projects that you ask me questions about, however, can be anything that is currently pending before the Zoning Review Board or the Board of Zoning Adjustment. It would have to be an application that City Council has already approved or denied, or that BZA has already approved or denied. And hearing those ground rules, we'll go ahead and get started. The first thing I'll say is that in order to understand anything about any zoning code in the country is that you have to read the regulations that are set forth before you. A lot of persons that reach out to our office start with, I heard X, or I heard Y, or I believe X, or I believe Y. And the best place to understand any information that is given is by reading the Code of Ordinances itself. Every municipality throughout the state of Georgia and any other place where there are zoning regulations have a Code of Ordinances that details everything related to zoning in that particular municipality. In the city of Atlanta, we are governed by Part 16, which is the zoning code, and it includes all of the districts, all of the overlays, all of the definitions, all of the supplementary regulations that are applicable to all zoning districts or all property here in the city of Atlanta. Each of the zoning districts begin with a statement of intent. So what that district is intended to do or intended to create. It continues with permitted principal uses. It continues on with accessory
Yeah.
uses. I'm not,
Are
I don't,
you, are
I'm
you
not, no,
supposed-
no, this is
Okay.
overarch, yeah. It continues with accessory uses, then continues with those things that are required via or are permitted via a special use permit. And then there are all some design standards, and that is how each one of the codes are set up. Even if it's in a special public interest district, it's set up the same exact way. Permitted uses in a table, design controls in a table, all things related to design following. So that's overarching for you all to remember and to put in your notes and to ask me about anytime throughout this presentation. So please, 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 once you finish this class, make sure that you are reading the content that is provided in the zoning code. It is the best way for you to understand what is required per district. Now, you all can see my screen, is that right, Samantha? Okay. First thing we're going to talk about is meeting procedures. In the Office of Zoning and Development, there are 3 meetings that occur on a monthly basis. One being the meeting held for the Zoning Review Board, the second for the Board of Zoning Adjustment, and the third for special administrative permits. In each one of those settings, there is hold on one moment for me. In each one of those meetings, there is a opening presentation. And I am taking specific note of that now because we just had a Board of Zoning Adjustment meeting, and there was a bit of discontentment in that meeting. In the chair's introduction, he or she, depending on the board or the hearing officer, reads in introductory statements regarding the meeting and its procedures. In that information, it details the process of the meeting, how much time the speaker receives, when the speaker comes up, what they're supposed to do, what certain sections of the meeting mean, how the board will adopt their agenda, how the board will adopt and act on applications before them. Many times when I look out into the audience during the chair's introduction, no one is paying attention. And that information that is given at the beginning really sets the process with regard to how a meeting is supposed to occur and how it will take place. Specifically for the Board of Zoning Adjustment, in 2015, the Board of Zoning Adjustment adopted a consent agenda. That consent agenda is items that both the staff has recommended approval for and the NPU has recommended approval for. In addition to that, if the NPU and the staff agree on conditions, those items are added to the consent agenda. At the beginning of the meeting, it is asked, is there any member of the public that is present that would like to remove an item from the consent agenda? It is then incumbent on the person who wants to remove an item to get up, come to the podium, and request that an item be removed from the consent agenda. In addition to that, the chair will ask any board members if there are any items that they wish to remove from the consent agenda. If they hear from no one, all the items listed on the consent agenda will be voted on at one time. Once that agenda has been disposed of via a vote, there is no more discussion on any of the items that are on the consent agenda. If your NPU has voted approval and you disagree, it is then incumbent upon you, if you are so inclined to do so, to come to the Board of Zoning Adjustment and speak on the item if you wish. You don't have to, however. You can send public comment to the BZA. They have their own box to receive comment in, and they are provided with all of that information prior to. But there is a process in the beginning where the chair talks about what the process of the meeting will be and how things are moved around on the agenda. With regard to the SAP hearing, there is not a chairperson, but there is a hearing officer that is appointed by me. That hearing officer also talks about a regular agenda and a minor agenda. The minor agenda items are not discussed, but if you are so inclined and want to have an item that's on the minor agenda discussed, you have to ask for that item to be pulled and added to the regular agenda. But again, it is during the chair's introduction or the hearing officer's introduction that those items are discussed. So please, please, please pay attention during the introductory comments that are provided during those hearings. Next, with regard to the recommending bodies and how applications move through the legislative process. Oftentimes when persons hear me refer to the legislative process, they might not understand what I'm saying, but our city government operates with the legislative body, that is the city council. All items that go before city council require legislation. So just like any other government entity, there is legislation that is created, legislation that is then forwarded to the NPUs, comes back to the zoning review board, staff provides a recommendation, NPU provides a recommendation, ZRB hears all public comment and testimony, and then they provide a final recommendation that is then sent up to the zoning committee of city council. It is the decision of city council that determines whether or not an application is approved or not approved. With regard to the BZA is a quasi-judicial board. And so when they make a decision, their decision is final. It is not a recommendation. The BZA receives a recommendation from the NPU and a recommendation from staff. They hold a public hearing on all items that are to be heard, and then they make a final decision on that application. And that is it. There's no more conversation with regard to the BZA. Only in the consequence of an appeal, which means someone is appealing a decision of the BZA, will that item continue. But it does not continue in a city body. It continues in the court system via an appeal. So many times, the Office of Zoning and Development and the NPU have this tug of war with regard to conditions. We encourage NPUs to provide written conditions to applications should the application be such a magnitude that there needs to be a mitigation of some of the things that occur. Most times it is related to ingress and egress. Where on the site can persons enter and exit the property, or should be related to those things. Should be related to whether or not a fence should be included on the property to mitigate any conflict between the development and any adjacent neighbors. Should be related to building materials. Should be related to lighting if lighting is going to be an issue of concern by adjacent neighbors. Or it should be things that ultimately, it should be things that are enforceable by zoning enforcement of the city of Atlanta, which means it must be based in items that are found in the zoning code and specifically with regard to that district. One thing we have found is that with regard to variance applications where they are seeking relief, we have NPUs who are restating the request, such as if the request is asking for a reduction from 5 to 5 feet, a reduction to 3 feet, a reduction to 2 feet, or whatever the reduction is, then the NPU is then asking again for that to be a condition. Well, that is the request. And should the Board of Zoning Adjustment approve that request, that is how the property must be developed. And here's what happens if that condition is then added by the BZA, or required to be added by the NPU to the BZA. That means that application has gone to a public meeting with the neighborhood association. It has had a public meeting with the NPU. It has had a public hearing with the Board of Zoning Adjustment. It has been approved and conditioned according to what they have already asked. When they submit their building permit to the Office of Buildings, because there are conditions on that application, they then have to come back to the Office of Zoning and Development for someone in that office to re-review what has already been reviewed in the request, which is why sometimes that conflict is between the staff in the Office of Zoning and Development and the NPU when you see those conditions not a part of the staff recommendation, because we understand that they have already been through the entire process. They've had a public hearing, and now BZA has approved the application, and there is no need for them to come back to the Office of Zoning and Development to have another review on what we've already seen as been approved. Same thing with site plans. Unless it is a site plan where the conditions, where that site plan does not show the exact conditions of the request, should be the only reason why you are including a site plan on a site plan condition with regard to BZA or zoning review board. And many times you will see staff not making a condition on a site plan, because we understand that in the development process, when they get to watershed may make a requirement that they move a building X amount of feet, but not violate the zoning conditions or the zoning district regulations. They may tell them they have to put things in other places. Fire department may require a lane to be wider, and it then affects the building. So you will find staff not requiring site plan conditions unless it is absolutely necessary. Now, let's talk about processes that come through our NPUs, or how legislation kind of moves through the city on a general basis. With regard to text amendments, those are text amendments to Part 16, to the zoning ordinance itself, whether we are changing or adding a definition itself, whether or not we are waiving a sign requirement. Anything that changes the actual text of the zoning district, it is done via a text amendment that is introduced either by the department or by a member of city council. Once it is introduced, it follows the same process as an application that comes before any NPU. Say an applicant submits an application to us, it follows the same exact process as a text amendment. Text amendment is introduced. I create a fact sheet most times, or put information in the email that I send to NPUs with regard to how an application, what the application is asking for. Okay, this is getting on my nerves. I'm sorry. I thought I had removed this. I have got to stop this, or it's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, I'm sorry. Well, I didn't mean to, but it was killing me. I couldn't continue with it doing that. Okay. Then once I create the fact sheet, give it a zoning number, and then send it out to all the NPUs. It is important to note, and I get this question quite often, why am I sending it to all the NPUs? Any change to Part 16 requires a recommendation to everyone in the city. So all NPUs need to provide a recommendation, whether you agree to it, not agree to it, you have some amendments you want to add to it, all things that change Part 16, you are required as NPU persons to provide a comment back to the city. So with regard to a rezoning is a change of entitlement of land. So there are 260 or so zoning districts here in the city of Atlanta that is inclusive of all the sub areas in each of the SPIs. And you, an applicant, whomever, can rezone from one zoning district to another. That criteria is found in chapter 16, chapter 27 of part 16, and it out the ways in which you can request a rezoning of a piece of property. An application that is submitted to the Office of Zoning and Development cannot be rejected, meaning the applicant, whether we like the application or not, is entitled to submit the application and it goes through the legislative process. They are aware that that application can either be approved or denied. The Zoning Review Board hears two types of applications. They hear rezoning applications and they hear special use permit applications only. That's the only two types of applications that they hear. With regard to special use permit applications are granting the right of something that is allowed in the district, but is not allowed by right. Many times you'll hear me say allowed by right, which means that it's something that is a permitted principal use in our zoning, in that zoning district specifically. And if it is not a permitted principal use, it is allowed via a special use permit. There is a little bit more leeway with regard to a special use permit and conditions because it is something that is not allowed by right. And usually there's a long list of conditions. It's limited to the person who's submitting the application, is limited to the hours, is limited to parking requirements, like the whole list of things can be considered with regard to an application that's asking for a special use permit. Those are usually institutional uses like schools and churches, or their personal care homes, or their nursing facilities, or their recreation type uses. We've used them for food truck parks that are operating all the time, and so forth and so on. Now, we analyze a special use permit based on certain criteria, and that criteria evolves around the hours and the manner of operation. And so the information that exchanges between my office staff and the person who's submitting the application is really based on how this operation is going to be in a community. How is the community going to react to the church being open X days of the week? Is it a large church that anticipates a lot of traffic? How is that traffic going to come in and out of that community? All those things are analyzed via a special use permit. In addition to that, the same kind of criteria is for schools and places of worship and any other type use allowed by a special use permit. The Board of Zoning Adjustment hears three types of applications: variances, special exceptions, and appeals. These applications are all relief from from part 16. So all relief is being sought from any of the zoning district regulations. A variance is to the setbacks. So if you see in this image that I have here on the right, you can ask for a reduction in the rear yard. You can ask for a reduction in the building of the maximum coverage. You can ask for a reduction in the front yard. You can ask for reductions in front, rear, and side yard setbacks. All those are reductions in setbacks. Those are all heard via a variance. It grants relief to those requirements because you have demonstrated that there is some type of deficiency with your lot. The zoning district requires that lots that are zoned R4 are to be 9,000 square feet. However, there are many lots that are zoned R4 that are not 9,000 square feet, and they cannot meet the setback requirements that are required by the code and build a home on it as well. And that is when an applicant will seek out relief from those requirements. Many times there's also a requirement, there's also a relief mechanism for saving of trees, and there's one with regard to signage. The other type of relief from the code is a special exception. Special exceptions are related to parking. And those are parking and fences and walls and active recreation. Specifically, someone may be looking for a reduction in parking, and they would apply for that via a special exception. They would be asking for an increase in the height of the fence or a wall from what is required in chapter 28. Or they could be asking for relief from active recreation. Say they have a home that abuts a right of way. There is a requirement in the code that no active recreation can be adjacent to a street. And so they would ask for relief from that requirement. And active recreation covers not only pools, but it covers basketball courts, pickleball courts, basketball courts, anything where people would be active adjacent to the street. And so to minimize that distraction, someone would have to ask for a reduction for relief from that requirement. Now, appeals are related to from a decision that is made by an administrative officer. For instance, if I made a decision, an interpretation, and a decision based upon an application that someone submitted to the office, my decision can be appealed, such as a decision from the director of the Office of Buildings, Mr. Pace, anyone on his staff, anyone on my staff, all those decisions can be appealed through the Board of Zoning Adjustment. You then, if you wanted to submit an appeal, you would have to submit that application to the BZA. We would set you on an agenda, and you would have to provide pretty much a case file as to how I or whomever the administrative officer is failed or erred to not act accordingly to the zoning ordinance. And effectively, it says that we acted in an arbitrary or a capricious way, and you would have to demonstrate how we did that in making our decision. Appeals to decisions made by the BZA are appealed either in Fulton County or in DeKalb County Superior Court, depending on where in the city of Atlanta that decision or the application is affected. And of course, you know, we are in 3 counties actually, but most of our cases are either in Fulton or DeKalb County. With regard to special administrative permit, this is another pinch point for Office of Zoning and Development staff and the NPUs. Special administrative permits are not permits in the sense that they do not grant the ability to construct something vertically. It allows the construction itself. There are districts, being the Beltline Overlay District, all of our neighborhood commercial districts, all of our SPIs, our live work districts, our multifamily mixed use and our multifamily district, as well as our IMIX district, all require special administrative permits in order for someone to construct a development on those properties. It is required prior to the submittal of an application to build that the developer or the applicant submit a special administrative permit. Now, this is where we get the rub between NPUs and city staff. The code requires that within 21 days of receipt of the application, the NPU is to provide comment. There are certain districts of the code that requires the applicant to mail a notice to the NPU, and there are other districts that do not require the applicant to mail an application to the NPU. Unless you have read the code and know specifically what districts those are, you will oftentimes be upset with city staff. To combat that, several years ago, I made the decision that all applications submitted for a special administrative permit, a courtesy copy of that application goes to the NPUs. Many NPUs say that they don't receive it, or we don't want the courtesy copy, or etc. Regardless of that, everyone gets a courtesy copy of the special administrative permit. It is incumbent upon the NPU to provide comment back. We are not going out to seek comment. We are not calling to seek comment. NPUs have a 21-day period to opine and to provide comment back to us. If we receive no comments back, none that we can react to, then we will continue with the approval process and the SAP may or may not be approved according to your satisfaction. The SAP does not check use. It is the underlying zoning district or the zoning district itself that checks the use. So if the use is permitted in the zoning district, the special administrative permit will be reviewed for all of the design requirements in that district. Does it have the right amount of windows? Does it have the correct width of sidewalks? Does it have the correct location for entryways in the relationship of the building to the street? Those are the things that the special administrative permit is checking. It is not checking the use. So if, for instance, it is in an MRC district and they are requesting to build 100 studio apartments, multifamily is permitted in the MRC district. So that application review will continue despite a community protesting the fact that studio apartments are being constructed. The district itself allows multifamily, therefore the SAP review can continue. Only in an instance where a use is not permitted, let's say it is adult entertainment. Adult entertainment is only allowed in the industrial district. In this district, this in my example, the district is MRC. That review will not continue because that use is not permitted. Okay. Special administrative permits also review cell towers, outdoor events, farmers markets, urban gardens, and the like. Now, these applications are usually found on a minor agenda and usually receive no public comments because they are within the confines of the code. They usually, I got a question, I think a couple of days ago, we sent a courtesy copy of an event that was occurring in a couple of days in that NPU. So with regard to special events, there is a two-part permitting process to a special event. The Mayor's Office of Special Events issues an event permit. And if there is vending on private property, then there's also a special administrative permit that may be issued, which is why that special administrative permit may be sent to you and the event is taking place in a couple of days. But the only thing we're checking for is that they have a location on the site where vending is going to occur and that permit is then issued to them. We also, in my office, deal with subdivision. Subdivision is in part 15, and that is how we subdivide land to create new lots or to acknowledge an existing lot in the city. Subdivision is related to residential property. Replat and lot consolidation. Replat is related to usually commercial properties. Lot consolidations can either be residential or commercial, and not lot acknowledged